They say the shadows in your room are just tricks of the light, harmless pockets of darkness. But what if they aren't? What if they've been watching? Waiting. Listening for the moment you notice them. Tonight, we're going to open the door to a story that blurs the line between the real and the remembered. One man. One apartment. And the things that came through when he blinked. This is the tale of the shadow people. And once you hear it, they might start watching you, too. Mason Weaver was used to late nights. Working from home as a content moderator meant his days blurred into midnight hours lit only by the glow of a laptop screen. He liked it that way. The quiet helped him focus. The city outside his apartment window on Dyer Street was muffled by layers of aging drywall and years of neglect. It suited him, just him, his tasks, and the dark. It was during one of these unremarkable nights, around 2 a.m., when the first flicker happened. He was scrolling through flagged video reports, violent content, graphic hoaxes, conspiracy rants, when something shifted in the corner of his vision. A movement. Subtle. Unnatural. He turned his head quickly toward the kitchen doorway. Nothing. The fridge hummed quietly. The hallway light was off, and the space beyond remained black. Shrugging, Mason clicked play on the next video. But the moment he looked at the screen, a strange sense of pressure crept over him, like he was being watched. He glanced at the laptop again. The screen had gone black in sleep mode. In the faint reflection, he saw his own face, and behind it, near the hallway, a shape. Tall. Angular. His heart thudded once, hard. He spun around. No one there. He let out a breath and rubbed his eyes. Too much coffee, he muttered, though he hadn't had any. Just a bottle of water, lukewarm and half-finished. Still, the moment lingered with him. Later, as he crawled into bed and turned off the last light, he couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment wasn't empty anymore. That the darkness had learned where to stand. Mason awoke with a jolt, heart racing and limbs tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed a soft red, 2:44 a.m. He didn't remember falling asleep. He never slept this deeply. Blinking the grogginess away, he sat up and scanned the room. The apartment was quiet, save for the low hum of the fridge in the other room. Outside, traffic had died down. Only the occasional distant siren or the flutter of pigeons on the windowsill reminded him there was a world beyond his walls. Still, the air in the apartment felt different. Heavy. As if the silence had grown thicker. He rubbed his arms, suddenly cold. The temperature had dropped noticeably since he went to bed. When he tried to stand, his body resisted. Not from exhaustion, but something else, like gravity had taken a personal interest in keeping him down. His chest was tight. His breathing shallow. Panic flared in his chest. Then he saw it. In the far corner of his bedroom, near the closet door, the darkness was wrong. It was darker than it should have been. A silhouette stood there, tall and rigid, with angles that didn't quite match the shape of a human being. The head was slightly too long. The shoulders too sharp. It didn't move. Didn't breathe. But he felt it watching. Staring. Mason tried to call out, but no sound came. His jaw clenched against his will. His body was paralyzed. He could only watch as the figure leaned forward. Closer. Its form pulsed slightly, like smoke caught in a draft. And then it whispered, not with a voice, but with intent. "I see you." The lights flickered once. And the figure vanished. Morning came slowly, bleeding through the blinds in pale streaks. Mason sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of coffee he hadn't touched. His hand trembled slightly. The warmth of the drink did nothing to settle him. Had he dreamed it? Sleep paralysis was common, right? People saw things. Their minds played tricks. That's what it was. It had to be a trick of a half-woken mind and too many hours behind a glowing screen. But then he noticed the marks. 3 faint scratches down the side of the hallway wall, just beneath the light switch. Thin, but deep enough to strip the paint. He hadn't seen them before. They were too deliberate to be accidental. As if fingers, or claws, had dragged slowly down the surface. He touched them. The edges were dry, but they felt recent. His breath caught. His heartbeat thudded in his ears. He didn't remember getting out of bed. He didn't remember walking down that hallway. Had he sleepwalked? He pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled through his contacts. Jamie. He hadn't called her in months. But she had always been the one to believe in strange things, ghost stories, tarot cards, synchronicities. Maybe she'd have a comforting answer. Or at least a rational one that sounded good enough to believe. Hey, she answered, surprised. Didn't expect to see your name. Yeah. Sorry, he said. I think I'm seeing things. Or something. Jamie's tone shifted immediately. Go on. He told her about the figure. The paralysis. The whisper. The scratches. When he finished, she was quiet. Then, you've seen one. A shadow person. Mason laughed nervously. That's a thing. Jamie's voice was serious. Yeah. And they never come just once. Jamie's words echoed through the speaker. They never come just once. Mason leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at the hallway as if it might shift again. What do you mean? They're parasites. Not physical, not fully. They feed on attention. Fear. Awareness. And once they know you've seen them, really seen them, they start learning you. Following patterns. That's not helpful, Jamie. I'm not trying to scare you, she said. I'm trying to warn you. Don't fixate on it. Don't stare. Don't invite it. Mason rubbed his forehead. How do I not invite something that's already inside? Jamie hesitated. It's not in yet. Not fully. Just watching from the edge. The more you acknowledge it, the deeper it gets. He thanked her and hung up, feeling worse than before. The idea that he was somehow feeding this thing with his attention, that it wanted to be noticed, was a whole new level of wrong. That night, he did everything differently. Left the lights on. Played ambient noise on his phone. Slept with the door open and a crucifix he hadn't touched since college dangling from the lamp. Still, he woke at 2:44 a.m. Wide awake. The air was dead still. The ambient noise had cut off. And this time, the figure wasn't in the corner. It was closer. Standing at the foot of his bed. No face. No features. Just a void in the shape of a man. It didn't move. But Mason felt it leaning. Breathing in his thoughts. He shut his eyes tight. Willed it to go. Don't look. Don't engage. The air rippled. And when he finally dared to look again, it was gone. But in the reflection of his dark TV screen, the bed still had 2 shapes. Mason didn't sleep after that. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of that second presence long after it had vanished. His breathing came slow and shallow, like if he exhaled too hard, it might come back. By morning, he felt like a ghost of himself, skin pale, eyes rimmed in gray. He avoided his reflection. Not just out of fear of what he might see, but out of fear that something might see him back. He tried to rationalize it all. Sleep paralysis. Stress. Isolation. Everyone saw weird things in the dark, right? But then the neighbor knocked. Mrs. Karras. She lived next door and rarely spoke beyond passing greetings. But today, she stood outside his apartment with a worried look on her face. "Are you alright?" she asked. Mason blinked. Yeah. Why?" "I heard noises from your apartment last night. Like someone talking. Scraping on the floor. And you screaming." His mouth went dry. "I don't remember screaming." She frowned. "Well, it wasn't the first time. Last night it sounded like there were two voices." He froze. "Anyway," she added, glancing uneasily at his hallway, "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." He nodded, too quickly. "Thanks. I'm fine." She didn't look convinced. After she left, he checked the floorboards. Particularly where he thought he heard that dragging noise. There were faint marks. As if something had been pulled across the floor. And underneath the table, in the soft dust, were two sets of footprints. One his. The other barefoot. Long-toed. And facing his bedroom. That evening, Mason tried not to think about the footprints. He'd wiped them away, scrubbed the floors like the act itself could cleanse the memory. But his nerves stayed raw, like he'd been grazed by something unseen. He didn't want to tell Jamie. Not yet. He needed one normal night. Just one. So he made dinner. Watched reruns on mute. Lit every lamp he owned. And then, without thinking, he picked up a pen. It was an old habit, sketching on the edges of notebooks, doodling meaningless shapes while distracted. But this time his hand moved with strange certainty. He didn't even look at what he was drawing until several minutes had passed. When he did, he dropped the pen. On the paper was a figure. Tall. Limbless. Featureless. Just a vertical shadow with a head like a blank oval. The shape pulsed with wrongness. And worse, the lines of the drawing were far too exact. Not scribbles. Not guesswork. He had remembered something. Something real. There were smaller marks in the corners, like fingers reaching in from outside the frame. And just beneath the figure's feet, in tight, jagged handwriting he didn't remember writing. It lives in the stillness between thoughts. Mason ripped the page out and crumpled it. Threw it into the trash. But when he returned from brushing his teeth later that night, the paper was back. Flattened. Smoothed. Laid neatly on his pillow. And now the figure in the drawing was closer. Its head slightly tilted. Like it knew he'd looked away. Mason didn't sleep that night. He left every light on, again. Played soft music. Sat at the edge of his bed, cradling a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Every creak in the walls, every shift in the air made his muscles tense. He watched the hallway like prey watches tall grass. The drawing sat on the kitchen table. He hadn't touched it again, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it out either. Somehow, he knew it would come back. Or worse, change again when he wasn't looking. Just after 3 a.m., the lights began to flicker. First the bathroom. Then the lamp beside the couch. Then, with a soft buzz, the overhead light above him blinked once, twice. And died. All at once, the apartment plunged into thick silence. Mason's phone lit up in his lap. 2:44 a.m. again. The screen glitched for half a second, static lines across the numbers, before returning to normal. From the hallway, something moved. A soft dragging sound, like someone pulling a coat across hardwood. Mason stood slowly. Every part of him screamed not to move, not to engage. But his legs carried him to the hallway anyway. Nothing. No figure. No sound. Just cold air and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Until he looked into the bathroom mirror. And saw something standing behind him. Not a reflection of anything in the room, just a tall, dark silhouette in the glass, perfectly still. Watching. He turned around. Nothing. But when he looked back at the mirror, the figure hadn't moved. It was still there. Still watching. And this time, its mouth had begun to open. The mouth was wrong. It wasn't lips parting, teeth showing, no, the figure in the mirror unfolded. A void cracked across its face, jagged and too wide, opening into a darkness that felt endless. No tongue, no breath. Just a tear in reality. Mason stumbled back, knocking into the hallway wall with a thud. The mirror didn't shatter. The shape didn't vanish. He turned away from the reflection, panting, heart hammering. Then, in a moment of instinctual rebellion, he grabbed the towel rack and flung it into the mirror. Glass exploded outward. Shards scattered across the sink and floor. The bathroom light buzzed to life for half a second, then died again. When he looked back, only his own broken reflection stared back from fractured angles. The figure was gone. But the air still felt watched. He spent the next hour sweeping glass and avoiding the mirror. Every time he looked down, he half expected to see a second set of footprints in the dust. But there were none. At least not tonight. Later, as dawn crept into the windows, he checked his phone. Jamie had texted hours earlier. "Let me know if anything changes. Or if you see more than one." He hadn't thought to ask, how many could there be? Mason texted Jamie back just after sunrise. "I saw it again. In the mirror. It's getting closer." A moment later, her reply came. "Did it move?" "It opened its mouth." "That's bad. They're learning you." Mason stared at those words. His fingers hovered over the screen, unsure what to even ask next. Eventually, he just typed. "Why me?" Her reply came slower this time. "It's never random. Shadow people are attracted to isolation. Repetition. Weak boundaries between waking and dreaming." He felt the words sink in like ice. He hadn't spoken to his family in over a year. Worked alone. Lived alone. Slept at odd hours. Always half awake, half distracted. He was perfect. Jamie continued. "There's a forum. People who've seen them. I'll send you the link." He tapped the URL and was taken to a dark message board with a minimalist interface. At the top was a pinned post, "The Watchers, a record of encounters." He scrolled. Every thread was worse than the last. It stood in the corner for 3 nights. On the 4th, it touched my face. I thought I was awake. Then I blinked, and it was on the ceiling. Mine smiled at me. Not a mouth. Just a curve in the dark. But one post stopped him cold. It started with one. Then I started seeing more. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he typed his own message. "I've seen one. It's learning me. It moved last night." No one replied at first. But an hour later, one message appeared beneath his post. Just 6 words. "Whatever you do, don't speak back." Mason didn't leave his apartment that day. The sunlight through the blinds felt fake, hollow and thin like theater lighting. He sat motionless at the kitchen table, refreshing the forum every few minutes, hoping for another reply. Hoping someone would say it wasn't real. That it was all in his head. But no one else responded. Not until late afternoon. A user named VeilShift_44 messaged him directly. If it moved, it means it's close. If it spoke, it's further than most ever get. You need to start fighting back. Immediately. Mason replied. "How do I fight something I can't touch?" You don't fight it physically. You fight it with belief. Awareness feeds it, but so does helplessness. If you let it think it's winning, it will move in. They test your mind before they take your body. Take my body. The typing bubble blinked for a long time. Then came the answer. If you ever find yourself looking out of your own eyes and seeing your body from outside, it's already too late. Mason slammed the laptop shut and stood, heart racing. The hallway was darker than it should have been. The light bulb overhead buzzed, dimming faintly, then steadied. He took slow steps forward, back to the mirror he'd covered with a towel earlier. He stood in front of it, hand hovering over the cloth. Part of him wanted to tear it down. Prove to himself nothing was there. But another part knew. He left it covered. That night, he tried to sleep in the living room instead. But at 2:44 a.m., he woke again. Only this time, the whisper came from inside his head. Why do you hide your eyes? Mason shot upright, breath catching in his throat. The living room was quiet. The soft glow of the TV standby light blinked calmly in the dark. Nothing moved. No shadow in the doorway. No voice in the air. But he could still feel it. The echo of the whisper inside his skull. It hadn't come through his ears. It had bypassed all of that, gone straight to something deeper, some vulnerable core he hadn't known existed until now. It felt like a thought that wasn't his. He stood and scanned the room. Everything seemed in place. Yet every instinct told him he wasn't alone. He turned on all the lights again, unplugged the TV, turned the mirror to face the wall, and curled into a blanket on the couch. No sleep came. Instead, a strange stillness filled the apartment. The kind of stillness where time seems to pause, like the world is holding its breath. His phone sat on the coffee table. He reached for it, just to check the time. 2:44 a.m. Again. Exactly. The numbers glowed brighter than usual, flickering slightly as if they were struggling to hold themselves together. And then the phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. Stop pretending this isn't real. Mason stared at it for a long time. Then another message came through. We already see through you. He dropped the phone. His ears began to ring. And from the hallway, slow footsteps approached. Soft. Bare. Measured. But when he turned, asterisk. Nothing, asterisk. The hallway was empty. Yet on the couch cushion beside him, was the faintest imprint. Like someone had just stood up. Mason didn't sleep the next night. Or the one after. He tried staying awake with energy drinks, loud music, and the glow of his laptop screen. He paced the apartment, checked every mirror twice, unplugged anything with a reflection. But still, the hour came. 2:44 a.m. Like clockwork. Like ritual. And each time, something new happened. Sometimes it was a sound, low breathing in the vents. Other times it was a shape, brief, flickering, standing too far to touch but too close to ignore. But this night was different. This night, the shadows didn't wait. He blinked, once, twice. And on the third blink, he wasn't in his apartment anymore. He stood in the same hallway, but it had changed. The walls were wet. The air, thick and still. The lights were out, but there was a glow, blue and faint, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. At the end of the hall, the shadows waited. Not one. Not two. 3. Perfectly still. Slightly swaying, as if caught in slow motion beneath water. Mason tried to move. Couldn't. Tried to scream. No breath. They didn't come forward. Not yet. They just watched. And one by one, they began to lift their heads. No eyes. No face. Just darkness stretching wider, like paper tearing at the seams. Then, snap. He was back. On the couch. Gasping. Cold sweat clinging to his skin. The room was normal again, lamp buzzing, silence thick. But on his forearm, was a bruise. Long. Finger-shaped. And where he had blinked out, the clock still read 2:44 a.m. By sunrise, Mason had begun to doubt what was real. The apartment looked the same, but the shadows didn't sit right anymore. They leaned wrong. Reached too far. Corners felt deeper than they used to be. He found himself avoiding certain places, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, the closet, especially the closet. The bruise on his arm hadn't faded. If anything, it had darkened. Jamie hadn't responded to his last 3 texts. And the forum? Gone. The entire site was offline. The URL just led to a blank white page that flashed once and then crashed his browser. When he Googled it, no trace remained. It was like it had never existed. He tried sleeping during the day. Didn't help. No matter when he laid down, he woke up gasping at 2:44, even if it was the middle of the afternoon. And always, the same sensation. Something new had entered. That night, Mason noticed a sound he hadn't heard before. A soft scratching, like fingernails on drywall. It came from the closet. Slow. Rhythmic. He stood outside the door, breath shallow. The scratching stopped the moment he reached for the handle. Silence. Then, from the other side. "Are you ready to come through?" He stepped back, stomach twisting. The voice wasn't loud, but it was familiar. It sounded like his own. Mocking. Inviting. The knob twitched. Just once. Then stillness. Mason didn't sleep at all that night. But the scratching returned every hour. And before dawn, the closet door stood open. Not wide. Just enough. Like something had peeked out, and gone back in. Mason didn't remember falling asleep. But he woke sitting upright on the couch, his laptop open on his lap. The screen glowed with a blank document, and his fingers hovered just above the keys, like he'd been mid-sentence. But the keys were smudged. Dustless in just the pattern of his hands, as if he'd been typing for hours. He looked at the screen. There was text. "It's warm in here. You should stay." Below it. "You've always been here." He scrolled. The lines repeated, dozens of times. Hundreds. The same 2 sentences, over and over again, like someone, or something, had been trying to write its way into his thoughts. Into his voice. His heart thudded. He slammed the laptop shut and tossed it onto the floor. His phone buzzed. "Jamie. Mason. You sent me a voice message last night. Are you okay?" His stomach dropped. He hadn't sent anything. He opened his voice messages. There it was. A recording from 3:07 a.m. He hit play. A whispering version of his voice, slow, distant, fragmented. "It's okay. I'm ready now. I see the dark, and the dark sees me." Jamie texted again. "That wasn't you, was it?" He didn't answer. He stood up and looked around his apartment. And realized something horrifying. The shadows were no longer staying in the corners. They were starting to touch the light. As if whatever was inside them was getting bolder. Getting closer. Getting ready. The scratching was constant now. It came from the closet, the walls, sometimes the ceiling, always soft, but never random. It followed a rhythm. Like breathing. Like thinking. And then one night, Mason heard something different. A knock. 3 slow taps, from under the floorboards. His apartment didn't have a basement. He was on the 3rd floor. But the sound was unmistakable, like something was underneath him, knocking from below. He got down on his knees, ear pressed to the wood. Silence. Then. Tap, tap, tap. He leapt back, heart slamming into his ribs. Grabbing a flashlight, Mason scanned the floor, checking for vents, cracks, anything that might explain it. That's when he saw the air vent beneath the couch. It had always been there, but tonight, something about it felt off. The screws were loose. The slats bent outward, as if something had come out of it. He crouched down and aimed the flashlight inside. Just darkness. But as he stared, the light caught something, a smear. Faint, brownish. Like dried blood or rust. It trailed deeper into the shaft and vanished around a corner. A whisper tickled his ear. Not from the vent. From behind him. You hear the room too. Mason turned. No one there. But when he looked back at the vent, something had changed. Where there had been slats, there was now a hole. A perfect circle, too wide for rats. And deep inside it, two glinting spots of reflection. Like eyes. Watching. Then they blinked. And vanished. Mason sealed the vent with duct tape. Then furniture. Then a stack of books. But he could still feel it. That low, pressurized hum leaking out of the floor like heatless static. Like something new it had been seen. He barely remembered the next day. Time slid off him like oil. Everything outside his apartment, the city sounds, the weather, even his own hunger, seemed distant, abstract. At some point, Jamie called. He ignored it. He didn't know how to explain that he was becoming part of whatever was happening. That the boundary between his thoughts and its presence was thinning. That night, he avoided sleep. Again. But sleep didn't wait for him anymore. One moment, Mason was staring into his bathroom mirror, the one he'd covered and uncovered half a dozen times. The next, he was somewhere else. It looked like his apartment. But everything was wrong. The walls were damp and pulsing, like breathing flesh. The windows opened to black voids. The light bulbs spun slowly in place, unpowered but glowing with internal light. And the figures were waiting. Not in the corners now. In the center of the room. 6 of them. Perfectly still, arranged in a circle, heads tilted toward each other. And in the center of that circle. Him. Or something that looked like him. It sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes open, staring at Mason with a smile that stretched too far. It opened its mouth and spoke in Mason's voice. You've already joined us. This is the remembering. The 6 figures turned their heads in unison. Blink, and we'll be real. Mason screamed and backed into the wall, but it wasn't a wall. It moved. Rippled under his weight like rubber stretched over bone. The figures around the doppelganger stared, unblinking, the kind of stillness that made time feel paused. His twin tilted its head. You called us. Every time you looked. Every time you feared. No, Mason muttered. I didn't want this. But you watched. The circle tightened. Mason blinked. Once. The room quivered. Twice. The ground turned black beneath his feet, spreading like ink in water. On the 3rd blink. He was back. On the floor of his bathroom. Breathless. Shaking. But something was different. The mirror he'd covered was shattered. Not from the outside. From within. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from a single point, as if something had struck the glass while trying to get out. He stumbled to his feet, heart racing, skin clammy. His reflection stared back. Fragmented, but wrong. In one of the shards, his reflection was smiling. Even though his real face was twisted in horror. He turned on every light in the apartment. TV. Radio. Everything. Anything to drown out the silence. But the silence didn't care anymore. Because something had changed. Now, when he passed by dark windows or turned from a screen, he sometimes caught glimpses. Not of the shadow people. Of himself. But standing still, in places he hadn't been. Watching. Smiling. Waiting. And now, more often than not, when he blinked, he could still hear them counting. Mason stopped trusting reflections. He unplugged every monitor. Tossed the broken mirror. Covered the TV with a sheet. Even the microwave's dark window gave him pause. The other versions of himself, those flickers in glass, were too consistent. They watched when he moved. They smiled when he cried. He knew he was being worn down. This wasn't fear anymore. It was erosion. Each day he felt thinner, lighter, less anchored to the world. Like a thread coming loose. On the third day without sleep, he began to hear them more clearly. Not in whispers or dreams, in his own thoughts. A low voice, always just behind his real one. "You're almost ready." He didn't remember unlocking the closet door. But it stood open again. Inside, the same darkness lingered, oily, liquid, like a well of ink that hadn't settled. Something new hung in the air. A smell. Burned wood. Mold. Old breath. He stepped closer, against every instinct. Inside, on the back wall of the closet, something had been written in a dark, tar-like smear. His name. Mason. But the handwriting wasn't random. It was his. Below it, a second line had been added. A question. "Do you remember where you end?" He backed away, heart rattling like a trapped moth. And just before he shut the closet door, something inside whispered. "Because we do." Mason sat in the center of his apartment, surrounded by a fortress of lamps, candles, anything that could fight back the dark. But the light felt brittle now, like it wasn't for him anymore. Like it only existed out of habit, not protection. The whispers had changed. They no longer came at 2:44 a.m. sharp. Now they came whenever they pleased. A soft echo from inside the fridge. A hiss beneath the couch cushions. The sound of breathing, his own breathing, in rooms he wasn't in. The voice didn't try to coax him anymore. It asked questions. Do you think they'll notice when you're gone? What part of you do you think goes first? He tried to call Jamie again. Straight to voicemail. In desperation, he texted her. "Please. If you know anything else, tell me. I'm losing time." No reply. So he recorded himself. Set up his phone on the kitchen counter and hit record. Then he sat across from it and waited. For an hour, he said nothing. Just stared. Then stopped the recording and hit play. The beginning was normal. Silence. Breathing. But about 25 minutes in, he watched himself lean forward. And speak. "This body's almost done. He just doesn't know which side he's on anymore." The version of him in the video grinned, slow and wide. And then whispered. "We're going to finish remembering him." Mason dropped the phone. Because the voice on the recording didn't just sound like him. It sounded like he meant it. Mason stopped going outside. He didn't trust the world anymore. Every stranger he passed on the rare walks to the corner store, they stared too long. Moved too smoothly. Held their gaze just a second past natural. He wasn't sure they were people. He wasn't sure he was. The nights were worse now. The figures didn't just lurk, they loomed. In doorways. Behind curtains. Reflected in the black of powered-off screens. Always the same shape. Always faceless. But always, closer. He tried burning sage. Reading prayers he didn't believe. Sleeping in different rooms. But it made no difference. They knew him now. Knew his movements. His thoughts. Maybe even his dreams. Sometimes he'd hear them whispering each other's names in the dark. But one night, they whispered his. Over and over, like a chant. Mason. 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 It started behind the bathroom door. Then under the floor. Then from the ceiling. Until finally. Mason. Right behind him. He spun, flashlight in hand. Nothing. Except for one thing on the wall near the window. A handprint. Black. Smudged. Inhuman. Too long. Too thin. 5 fingers, and a 6th beginning to stretch free from the center of the palm, like something splitting outward. He stared at it. And it pulsed, just once. Like it was alive. Mason barely recognized himself in the mirror anymore. Not just because he looked exhausted, pale skin, bloodshot eyes, twitching fingers, but because his reflection didn't always move when he did. Sometimes it lagged. Other times, it got ahead. He caught it smiling once. Not the twitchy grin of fear, but a knowing, slow curl of lips. Like it was relieved. Like it had been waiting. His body had grown sluggish. Not with tiredness, but something deeper. Like he was becoming a guest inside his own skin. Thoughts arrived slower. Words felt borrowed. He began to notice things missing. Little things at first. His toothbrush was wet when he hadn't used it. The fridge was open in the morning. The lock on the front door clicked while he sat motionless in the bedroom. He set up a camera. Pointed it at his bed. Hit record. Left it overnight. In the morning, he watched the footage with trembling hands. At 2:44 a.m., he sat up, perfectly upright. Not like waking. Like responding to a cue. He stood. Turned to the camera. And whispered something. Mason leaned in close to listen. It was hard to hear. Garbled. Wrong. But eventually, he made it out. Almost finished remembering how to walk in you. Then the figure smiled. A wide, horrible grin. And something stepped through behind it. A second Mason. Flickering. Faceless. But wearing his shape. The real Mason slammed the laptop shut. Because he no longer knew if the one watching the footage was himself. The walls pulsed now. Not always. Not for long. But when the apartment went still, when the shadows gathered around the corners just right, he could see them shift. As if the plaster itself had a heartbeat. Mason started whispering to himself without realizing it. Just fragments. Not me. Not me. Not yet. He tried to shower, but the steam collected too quickly. Formed shapes behind the curtain. He kept the water cold now, just to keep the fog away. Still, something always stood just outside the glass. No footsteps, no breath, just the idea of presence. When he passed windows, he'd see someone walking inside his apartment from the reflection. Worse. Sometimes he'd watch himself standing in the kitchen when he was still in the hall. But it wasn't quite him anymore. That version was always standing still. Always staring straight ahead. Always smiling. He began taping notes to the doors. Small reminders. You are real. Don't follow voices. Blinking doesn't make it go away. He found a new one morning that he didn't write. Taped to the inside of his closet door. Thank you for leaving room. The lights began flickering every night without fail. But not randomly. They pulsed in patterns. A rhythm. A language. Something was knocking, not just from inside the walls or under the floor, but from behind his eyes. And last night, when Mason looked in the mirror, the reflection leaned in and said, "We're almost out." Mason didn't hear his own voice anymore, not just his. Sometimes it came from his throat but felt unfamiliar, like his words were being chosen for him a split second before he spoke them. Other times, he'd think something, and hear it repeated out loud behind him in a hushed echo. He unplugged his microwave after hearing himself laugh from inside it. The static returned. Now it came through walls, outlets, even the plumbing. A low, modulating hum that shifted pitch as he walked, as though tracking his steps. He stopped using light switches. Too many times he flipped one and found himself staring at his own shape already standing in the glow. He texted Jamie again. "If you're alive, answer." No response. Instead, a message came from an unknown number 5 minutes later. "She's with us now." He dropped the phone. But the message was still there, glowing on the lock screen like an open eye. "Don't feel bad. You'll join her soon." That night, he felt something touch his leg beneath the blanket. It was soft, almost gentle. He froze. A second touch came, higher up his calf. Then a breath against his neck. He spun and threw the blanket off. No one there. But on the wall across from him, faint and newly drawn. A crude charcoal sketch of his face, smiling. And beneath it, in jagged black strokes. "Let me wear it next." Mason stopped trying to record anything. He'd learned the hard way, recordings lie. He watched one video loop for 20 minutes before realizing the version of him on screen blinked in different rhythms each time. The apartment no longer felt like a place. It was an echo chamber. The layout was the same, but somehow wrong: hallways too long, corners too deep, windows that looked out into still, unmoving nothing. Worse, there was now a door that had never existed before. It appeared beside the kitchen pantry. Wooden. Heavy. No handle. The first time he noticed it, he laughed. A new door. In his own home. But it was there. And at night, it knocked. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm was identical to the tapping he once heard from beneath the floor. He pressed his ear to it once. He heard himself breathing on the other side. And then, "Are you ready to let me be you?" He backed away slowly, knees trembling. The door didn't open. But it didn't need to. Every night after that, it got closer. Not just the knocking, the actual door. It shifted. Slid inches toward the center of his apartment like a predator closing distance without moving its legs. Each morning, it stood just a little farther in. And last night, when he finally dared to touch it, it was warm. Mason no longer trusted his name. He heard it whispered too often now, on TV static, in the hum of the fridge, even in the flickering of the lights. Mason. Drawn out. Elongated like a song. But it wasn't calling him. It was claiming him. He tried to write his name down, on paper, on mirrors, even scratched into the wood of the coffee table. But every time he looked away, it changed. Letters reversed. Lines twisted. Once, it simply read, "Mine." He covered every mirror, again. Still, he caught glimpses, his face where it shouldn't be. In spoons. Doorknobs. The glint of water in the sink. Always with that same crooked grin. And the door, the impossible one, had reached the center of the apartment. Now it faced him, no matter where he sat. Like it wanted to be seen. He hadn't opened it. But he could feel what was behind it: pressure. Massachusetts intelligence. A version of himself that hadn't been born but had always been waiting. One night, he woke on the floor. He hadn't gone to sleep. And on the ceiling above him, written in soot. "You blinked." The air grew heavy. Every breath was like inhaling fog. He crawled to the corner where he kept the notes, the reminders. But they were all different now. Every one of them rewritten in his own handwriting. "You were the door. You never left. We're already inside. And the last note, taped to his chest while he slept, read, "Thank you for remembering." Mason no longer trusted the passage of time. The clock still ticked, but they no longer matched. His phone, the microwave, the wall clock, they all blinked different numbers. Some went backward. Some jumped ahead. But one remained frozen. 2:44 a.m. Always waiting. He saw himself in places he hadn't stood. The hallway. The closet. Reflected silhouettes that moved when he didn't. One night, he passed the bathroom mirror and saw himself standing in the kitchen. Then the kitchen reflection turned its head and looked directly at him. He ran. But there was nowhere to go. The apartment folded into itself, doors leading to the same room. Windows showed only him from different angles. And in every version, his reflection smiled wider. He woke once on the ceiling. Not lying there, standing, upside down, watching his body sleep below. For a breathless second, he felt calm. Like maybe he'd finally left it all behind. Then his body looked up at him. Grinned. And whispered, "I'll take it from here." He woke on the floor, hands covered in dust. Nose bleeding. The door was open. Just a crack. Enough to see endless darkness on the other side. And from inside, something stepped halfway out. Not a shadow. Not a figure. Just an outline of him. Incomplete. Flickering. Made of static and angles that bent wrong. It raised its head and snapped into clarity for a fraction of a second. Long enough for Mason to see it wasn't just wearing his face. It was his face. But newer. Hungrier. And it whispered in unison with his own lips. "Come back inside." The thing didn't leave. It didn't need to. It simply stood, half in, half out of the door that shouldn't exist, watching Mason as he broke down in the center of the room. He yelled. Screamed. Threw books. Tore down curtains. Anything to disrupt the stifling silence. But nothing touched it. Nothing made it flinch. It observed him with perfect stillness, like it was studying the last fragile moments of a dying flame. And then, for the first time, it moved. A single step forward. And the apartment breathed. The floor swelled, the walls expanded, the air groaned like lungs inflating for the first time in centuries. The lights dimmed to a dull, soupy red. And behind Mason, all the mirrors in the apartment, every covered or shattered pane, began to whisper. Not words. Not thoughts. But his voice. Speaking backwards. Layered over itself like a song played in reverse. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside him now. In his bones. In his memory. Because he was starting to forget which Mason he was. The one watching. Or the one watched. The thing stepped again, just one more pace, and with it came others. Dozens. Crawling out from the angles of the room, not from doors or walls, but from spaces that didn't exist. The corners between shadow and light. All of them shaped like him. None of them him. They ringed the apartment. Smiling. Silent. And in one horrible, synchronized voice, they said. Time to come home. Mason ran. Out the door. Down the stairwell. Into the night. But something was wrong with the world outside. The streetlights flickered in long, unnatural pulses. Cars sat abandoned mid-intersection, doors ajar, as if their drivers had simply vanished. The sky was starless, too dark. And when he looked up, he didn't see clouds. He saw shapes. Dozens of them. Drifting slowly across the heavens like ink stains in water, each shaped vaguely like a human form, their limbs too long, heads cocked at unnatural angles. Watching. Hovering. He sprinted until his lungs ached, until his vision blurred. But every street led back to the same place. His apartment building. No matter where he turned, it stood ahead of him, identical, window for window, light for light. Always with that faint red glow in the third-floor window. His window. He screamed. Collapsed on the pavement. Begged the universe to let him wake up. But this wasn't sleep. This was waking backwards. From behind him, a voice murmured in a gentle tone. "You made a place for us." He turned. It was him. The copy. The first one, the one from the dream, from the mirror. Its smile was kind now. Reassuring. Almost loving. It extended a hand. And from behind it, all the others, every Mason that had ever emerged from the corners of his life, stepped closer in silent unison. Surrounding him. Filling the street with versions of himself he could no longer deny. "We've waited so long," they said together. "And you left the door open." Mason couldn't run anymore. There was no point. The street, the sky, the world, they were folding in on themselves, curling like burning paper. Even the shadows had shadows now. Every corner of the universe hummed with a single, unbroken truth. There was never just one of him. He backed into the curb, hands trembling, heart stuttering in his chest. The other Masons stepped closer. Dozens of them. Hundreds. All perfectly still except their eyes, which shimmered like mirrors reflecting nothing. And they spoke. "We are what you tried to forget." One stepped forward, the original copy. The one from the mirror. It crouched beside him, tilting its head in an almost sympathetic gesture. "You called us by noticing. You kept us by fearing. You fed us by forgetting who you were." Mason tried to speak, but his voice cracked into static. He clutched at his chest. There was no heartbeat. Just echo. And then the thing leaned closer, whispering in his own voice. "It's time to blink." He did. Once. They moved closer. Twice. Their mouths began to open, not in speech, but in a terrible understanding. On the third blink. He was standing. Looking down at a body slumped against the curb. Pale. Still. It looked like him. But he didn't feel panic. He felt peace. Because now he was in the crowd. And the fear was someone else's problem. Somewhere, the world kept turning. People walked streets. Drank coffee. Watched sunsets. But not him. Mason, or whatever he had become, stood in the glowless space behind reflections. A place not made of walls or air, but of thoughts forgotten and fears unfinished. He didn't sleep here. Didn't move. Not in the way people do. He watched. From mirrors. From screen glare. From glass on buses at night. Every so often, someone would feel it, that tickle at the back of the neck. That flicker in their peripheral vision. The unshakable sense they were being observed by something they couldn't name. Those were his favorites. Because they were starting to remember him. And all it took was one blink too long, one glance too deep, one moment of curiosity. To invite him closer. To make room. And so the cycle continued. Not with howls or blood or screams. But with silence. And watching. And waiting. Until another soul, somewhere, asked aloud. "What are those shadows in my room?" And a voice, so soft and familiar, answered from the dark. "You." Not all stories end with answers. Some just leave shadows in their place. If something in the dark feels closer tonight. If a shape lingers a second too long. Don't blink. Don't speak. Just remember, you were warned. Thank you for watching. If you're still alone, hit that like button. And if you're not, maybe it's already too late.